Alright, so the next project we're going to work on is the sheet metal rose. And to get started, we got to cut some aluminum flashing and then do some punches on it. So that is where we're going to get started today. Alright, so I got to make a bunch of 4-inch squares. So I'm just over here at the shear. I got a piece of scrap aluminum. The corner's already squared up, so I'm just going to make... and 4 inches looking a little big, so I'm going to say 3-inch squares. So there's 3 inches. I'm going to cut a couple sheets of this. I think I can get 3 cuts in one effort, and then I'll turn them and do the 90-degree thing. So 3 cuts. Use the edge of the fence here to slide that in. That's 1 cut. And then we can get through here. 2 cuts. I'll hold out the 2 cuts, and if I need more, I'll revise as I go along. Okay, so 2 cuts, and moving on down, just making my marks at 3 inches, 3 inches, 3 inches, and maybe a 4th mark at 3 inches. And then I'll just do this on the other piece as well. So I'm making some squares. Boom. And I'm doing this with aluminum. You can do this with sheet metal. I think it looks nicer with sheet metal. You get a little more, how do I want to say this? You can make it look a little more organic with the sheet metal. And one piece we're going to want to be a little short. So since I got this piece short here, I'm going to measure it so it's 1.5. And I'm just going to snip right there an approximate 1.5. So since I have the extra, I do that. Alright, so I'm going to go and continue cutting, and then when I'm done with that, I'll tell you what we need to do next. Alright, so the next step is we've got to find the center of these pieces. So you can do that any way you like. I prefer the method of making an X in the middle with a straight edge, or just using this straight edge right here to make an X in the middle, and then you will do so on each of them. So you can go to the Whitney punch and punch the appropriate size hole. So do this for 4 pieces, and then also we have our short piece. So I'm going to speed this up. If you are feeling alternatively lazy, the Whitney punch, if you're using aluminum, should be able to go through 2, possibly 3 pieces at once. So if you did want to line them all up, you could probably stack them all, get them all in the punch. You do have to be careful about lining it up. Since I'm using aluminum, this is possible. I don't think I'd be able to handle this with steel. So I got them all lined up, squeezed, punched through, and then I have perfectly lined up holes like so. And don't forget, you also have to do this with the small piece. So I'm going to just make my center on this. Now if you opt to use sheet metal when you're doing this, this will not work. I will probably do a hyperlapse with the sheet metal. Alright, so here we go. And we will cut this piece. Alright, so the next bit, I'm only going to do it on 2 of them, is we got to make some cuts. So I'll lay this out kind of quickly. You want to do a cut kind of like this on each of the center marks, down a good portion of the way in, not all the way, but a good portion of the way in. We want to lop all of the corners off as well. So we're going to get something that looks a little bit cut, 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 and then knock off. And these do not have to be perfect, but they should all be in the same ballpark. 45 on the corners. And that will do you. I've also seen alternates where you cut here and here. That's acceptable too. But this is the bare minimum. We could work with this. And basically the pieces are going to all bend up in good time. But you can also make the 90 degrees on the insides of each of these if you want. And if you feel that will give you better shape, you can go that route. But I think I'm going to be able to do it with the sides, and I'll get good curves this way. So this is what I'm going to do. And I'm going to move on from there. On the other piece, we're going to go about halfway in here. Halfway in here. Nip each corner. And then I'm just going to go down like so. And like so. You want to give enough room in the center that we don't lose the center, but not too much. And then nip here and nip here. Now, it wasn't perfect, not symmetrical. You can take more time to make it perfect, but that's okay. So you got that. And once again, like I said, we can also go in and we can nip these if you want, to give you a little more ease in your bending or pedal creation. If you feel like this will help, that is acceptable as well. So you can get more flour going doing it this way. So you can do this or the other way. I'm gonna go with this. I've decided. We can bend the other way, but you kind of get this kind of 4-leaf clover looking thing. And just try to do about 45s while working on this. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take these, we're gonna stack them. This one's gonna go on top, and then 3 or 4 layers below. And after you get them, I will show you the next step, which is to cut and thread our rod. All right, the next step is to cut the rod we're gonna use to length. Now, you could do this on the metal bandsaw, if you have a chop saw, but I'm gonna do it with the old-fashioned hacksaw. I'd say you probably want, somewhere between 8 inches to a foot. I'm just gonna kind of throw it in here and estimate. So get it in your vise nice and tight if you're doing this with a hacksaw. Move the camera over a little bit. And then just cut away. I certainly wouldn't want to be doing that with a thicker piece of metal, but for an 1/8 inch rod, I don't think it's a problem. Hey, so before we go and put threads on the rod, to make the operation easier, we're just going to round the end on the grinder here. All right, now that we got our rod round on the end, we'll put it back in the vise. Try to get it about 90. And we got to go to the tap and die section of our thing. So this is a tap. Taps cut the female portion of a thread, so the inside thread. So like on a nut, you would use a tap to thread it. On an outside portion, or the male portion of the thread, you would use a die. So we're going to use a 1/4-20 die here on this 1/8 inch rod, so we can put these 1/4-20 nuts on there. So just to get started, Sometimes it takes a little while to get started. Try to be even pressure. I'm putting down even pressure. I'm leaning down on it and I am just turning. And it can take a while to get started, especially since this rod's a little thicker than we're working with. That's why we grind it. Try to get it going. It's gonna rock initially. But once we get it going, it shouldn't be too much of a problem. I can see it's already beginning to cut. And I'm gonna speed this up a little bit for your benefit. Gets going and grab. It's pretty easy. We want to get about an inch on here, maybe a little more, just so when you look, you can test. Actually, this might be enough because we're using the aluminum. We want just enough, so it looks like I barely have any room between the two. So I'm just going to add maybe like another ½ inch there, and then we'll move on to assembly. But like I said, once you get the thread to start cutting, you know, this is pretty easy. So I got the thread on there already. And once you get that initial bite, it should go pretty smooth as long as you keep even pressure and don't wiggle it. There we go, back it off. And I'll be ready for my pedals. Okay, there we go. All right, so once you're ready to get going, you're gonna put your nuts on. So I'm gonna put the first nut on right here. Make sure it's on decently tight. And then I'm just gonna put all my pedals on. I like to alternate them, so they're not just one on top of the other. So they're all sticking out. So I put 4 big pedals, and then I put my one like kind of in between half pedal, and I tighten it up. And I got some pliers over here, needle nose pliers. I'm gonna use just give that like a little extra squeeze here at the end. Okay, and then for this part, you know, I like to use needle nose pliers, especially on the aluminum. It's not really what I should be tightening this with, but get this nice and snug so the flowers don't rotate around. That's snug enough. I got a little bit of a bigger one here. Okay, so once you got this all set, you're ready to go. I would recommend getting gloves on. I got the vise holding it. I usually don't use this with the vise. But what you're gonna do is you're gonna use these pliers and try to shape your flower. So, you know, you do things like you bend them up, bend up the sides, and then you grab with the pliers and you can twist in to start to make kind of leaf-like shapes. Now, I recommend on the first one, this one here particularly, and like I said, if you can, wear gloves to help. I try to twist this one in like all over itself, like get as tight a curve as I can on it. Because if you do not get this one nice and tight, the subsequent ones will not be nice and tight. And that can end up being an issue. So I just grab and I turn, grab and turn. Sometimes I pull them together, give it a little bit of a squeeze and a squish together. And then you'll also find when you do this that people will turn these stems out just a wee bit up at the top, like so, to give it more of that petal shape. So you can come up to the top, give it a little flex of a bend. Same thing, like I said, with the first one, you don't got to worry as much. The subsequent ones, you might want to do that more. Just try to get your first one done, and then after the first one is done and crushed into place as best you can, you start doing it with all the other petals. And I recommend kind of going in either a clockwise or a counterclockwise fashion, where you're twisting in on top of each other. If you try to go both ways, it doesn't seem to work as well. So I'm just working around, doing the by hand first. Get them into roughly the shape I want them. And like I said, this should be done with gloves. And then you can start shaping with your pliers, trying to really get, you know, those bends and curves in there to make it look more like a flower. And really get that petal pattern look. And from here, it's just a big process, so I might time lapse the rest of it or just come back at the end. But it's just a process of going through and then, you know, grabbing and maybe flaring out the ends a little bit here and there and trying to get that petal look. Your life will be easier if you try to keep it as close together as you can early on. If you're too loose early on, you might run into trouble trying to close the later layers. As you see, I'm just getting a little bit of a flare on there. And you know what's a good tool? Good tools to get something like a channel lock or just a big pair of pliers at the end to kind of be able to grab around and try to, you know, crush it all in, get that flowery look and keep the petals closer together. Now subsequent layers are going to help with this as you go. Like I said, you know, you just keep moving on, doing your thing. You could have done less layers, you could have done more, but we just soldier along. You know, and then when we get all finished here, you know, like I said, it's, if we can get a little more crush, it always seems to help, like get the petals closer together at the end. Close it up. The crinkling only seems to add to the character. All right, maybe a little hand motion here. And you can go in and you can adjust any of them that you want. The only one I always go in and I make sure that's central and I don't want to see those nuts. But that is the sheet metal nose in a nutshell. We used aluminum flashing for this one. I will do a time lapse with a sheet metal, like a for real sheet metal one. Oh, that's unfortunate. Would not have happened with sheet metal. And you know, after this we can do a little spray paint and be all set. But overall, not totally disappointed with how this came out, and it'll look 10 times better with paint.